This is Jonathan Zacks, co-founder and CEO of Go Reminders. And in my episode of the Business Growth Architect Show, I'm going to discuss how to get rid of no-shows, tire kickers, and unqualified prospects. So listen to the show to find out how to fill your calendar with qualified leads.
Welcome to the Business Growth Architect Show. I am Beate Gillette. I am the host. I want to welcome you to our globally top 10% ranked podcast, where you will hear from industry experts about the strategies that are working right now to unlock hidden opportunities in any market so that you can grow your authority and scale your impact. And now let's get started with the show. Welcome back, everyone. This is Beate Gillette, your host of the Business Growth Architect Show. Today, we're going to talk about how to get people to show up for the very appointment that they have set with you, not cancel 2 minutes prior to that, not be caught watching Sesame Street and then forgetting all about you because of the riveting content they just consumed, but how to be a professional, how to show up so that you can make money with your appointments. And the answers for all of this are going to be brought to us today by Jonathan Zacks from Go Reminders. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Tell me a little bit about what do you do and what is this idea about getting people to show up? Why is that even important? Is that even a problem?
Yeah, sure. No shows is what we are focused on. So we're laser focused on cutting out appointment no shows, helping businesses that have appointments booked, that have an issue where appointment time comes around and people are not there. And we help that through automated text message reminders and a bunch of other ways. But in essence, the no-show is a really complicated problem for a few reasons. One, it sort of drips, and it's not a clear, it's not like you're having a flood and you're just not able to work for a day or a week, but it comes and goes. It could be, even if it's once a day or multiple times a day, people don't realize that could be a 20% decrease in revenue just from that or more. And so the problem doesn't really present itself to a lot of people in the first place as a major problem until way later down the road when people are looking for, oh, well, how can I improve my business? And then they're like, well, let's see, here are some problems. And then they calculate and they realize, oh man, this is actually a really big problem. And it also has this psychological weirdness where it feels good and bad when you have a no-show, especially if you have a packed day. And let's say you didn't plan lunch for yourself and suddenly someone doesn't show up, it feels like, ooh, I just regained this hour. Even if that means maybe you won't get paid for that hour until a month later when the person is able to reschedule or you're able to fit them in, that it doesn't click. It just feels like an immediate relief. And oh man, I now have, I can eat, I can breathe, I can text family, I can do all this other work that I have free time for now. But usually in reality, that extra free time gets filled with not important work. And so it's sort of this multifaceted problem where often it's not really clear. And the immediate feeling is hard to fight against about getting extra free time back.
100%. There's days when I do my interviews for the podcast and my own interviews when I'm a guest and I'm scheduled on the hour every hour. And then I'm on a call and somebody doesn't show up. You are absolutely correct. I'm going like, I can actually use the restroom. I can actually go get a cup of coffee across the street. I can actually sit down for a second and, upload all this other stuff. You're absolutely correct. There's a moment of relief. So let's talk about the numbers though. You say 20%. Is that like an average that 20% of people that make appointments don't show up? Is it for all appointments or is it specific for a certain type of appointment?
It's specific for types of appointments and from business to business, industry to industry. So there's no real overall average no-show rate. What is standard for the vast majority of businesses is that it's a fairly simple problem to solve for let's say 80% of no-shows. So it's sort of the 80-20 rule where you can put in a little work and you'll get a lot of benefit to get people to show up, but there will always be no-shows. Some businesses, it depends on the volume of the business also and the price tag. If you're in real estate, there's no price tag associated with each appointment, but if you can get people to show up, That'll be the sooner you can close out a deal and get a home sold, whether you're dealing with a buyer or a seller. And so that can really dramatically decrease your time for how long something is on the market and until it sells. If you're a physician or a hairstylist or a tattoo artist or an attorney, and you are getting paid for each appointment, that means that that revenue really isn't there. So if you have 10 appointments a day in one business, you could have 10, you could have 3 appointments in another business, you could have 30 or 40 in a different business, and then how many staff members you have. So it really just depends, but it scales. The noticeability of no-shows sort of scales. If you have 3 appointments a day and you have 20% of no-shows, you're not even going to see a no-show each day, but you might see one every couple of days. If you have 20% and you have 10 appointments a day, you'll see 2, but you have 8 other appointments. So it's a really big problem. Like 50% or 60% no-shows immediately feel like a major problem. Most people who no-show preventable and be not malicious. The ones that we can't solve are just the emergencies, or people at the last minute get distracted by something and aren't seeing their notifications or something like that. But it turns out that that's really a small percentage compared to the vast majority.
I was actually just going to ask you about that. What are the common excuses? Because most of the time, if I forget an appointment, it's because it didn't make it in my calendar for whatever reason.
So there's this like vast sea of random, and that is the big one. That, like, a lot of them are preventable, some of them are not. I mean, we can talk about how I didn't show up to my first meeting with you, and the reason was really random. It was that I was on vacation that week, had cleared my entire schedule and missed that one appointment, and had my phone on do not disturb while I was on vacation, and noticed an hour later. Like, that's really random. And it's like, even I mess up with this, and I specialize in this, but there are a lot of random things like that. However, the other common ones are just that people don't look at it until the last minute, and then they look at their calendar an hour before and they're like, shoot. And then it's, so, it's they're either, if they are responsible, they text or call saying I can't make it, or they just don't show up. But a lot of that can be solved by just basically getting people to confirm ahead of time. If there's a conflict, people will be able to tell you that ahead of time. A lot of people will know their schedule a few days before or a week before, however long it takes the business to be able to fill a slot. That's sort of the timing to use. They just double booked. They didn't put it in their calendar. Another thing is that they meant to call, but they just didn't get around to it. Often there are certain systems where a reminder will come, but you can't respond to it. So that's another one where people will say, well, I responded and I sent you a message saying I couldn't go, but the system wouldn't get the message to the business owner. And then the other big one that is really not solvable by simply automation is just people don't want to go to certain appointments. So if it's a sales meeting, they're definitely a chunk that automation and reminders can help, but there's a chunk that people just don't want to go. And so you have to be creative with the messaging for that to really, A, remind people of the value of the meeting, and B, give people the out early enough so that you can fill that. Because there's no point in sort of tiptoeing around it and thinking, well, I don't want to scare them away, so I'm just not going to remind them, or I'm just not going to tell them about the value, or I'm not going to ask them to confirm because I don't want them to not confirm. And what it leads to is just the last minute cancellations. So that's a big chunk, is just like people just don't want to go to some appointments. And as the business owner, if you're in a situation like that, you need to figure out ways to tell ahead of time so that you're not just relying on your hope that they'll show.
So you made a very interesting point. We have to differentiate as business owners between appointments people want to have and appointments people don't want to have. Let's put this in relationship to our listeners. An appointment with a tattoo artist, most likely that's something you thought about. You're probably not going to miss that maliciously,
right?
Unless you freaked out and you realize that maybe you don't want to got cold feet, right? But let's talk about, I think, some of the appointments that most of us are having the most issues with as coaches, consultants, experts, and consultants, is that people are, when we are following up on things and we ask questions like, how's your business doing? Or what seems to be the problem? And we are going in now diagnosing a business issue or a life coach, where people say one day they want to tackle that, and then the next day they go, it's not that bad, I can tolerate the pain. We have a process in place. Let's say, as a business, everybody should have a process in place to get the leads vetted, to get the vetted leads into then the actual conversation, and then you perform the service, right? So I would say the pre-call, the appointment setter, the vetting call is probably the most challenged of all calls, correct? Because that is
Yeah,
where you have to ask the tough questions. You are saying that in this particular category, I have to get clear about the category of call or desirability of
absolutely.
the appointment or call that I have. And then what do I do if I'm a high risk for no show category? It's a messaging then? Is it the
Yeah.
consistency of the follow up? Take us through it.
So it's really important, the messaging, and it's basically value-based reminders is a component of it, of just communicating the value of that meeting in the reminder message. That's one thing. If it's, hey, by the end of this call, you're going to have a solid plan for tackling this, or you're going to feel a sense of relief after we have this call, because anything that makes sense for this call, or you'll have a 3-step action plan for blah, 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 blah. Anything that, if you basically have to apply the rest of your process, whether it's sales process or anything, to the reminders. So for example, think about what you're communicating on that call. How do you start that call out? How do you make sure people are engaged from the beginning of the call through to the end of the call, and all the parts of the call, and make sure that they book another call or pay or whatever it is, commit at the end of that call. Think about what you're going to communicate, and think what you can pull out and put in the reminder messages. So that's the first thing. And then think about all the other tactics for engaging people. It might not be a good fit for the people. At some point before that call, during that call, after that call, you're going to be presenting them with questions and figuring out whether they're a good fit and whether you think you're going to be able to close them and whether it's worth their time and your time to proceed. So see if you can fit any of those. Those might be filter questions. Those might be, the qualifying filter questions. It might be just reminding them of certain aspects of the process. Those are things you can work into the reminders. And then the timing is really important. You want to make sure that you and asking for confirmation. If you ask someone to confirm and they don't, and our system will just be, reply C to confirm, or if it's an email reminder, it's just a button to click. It's a really easy step. And it allows you to filter out all the people who reply to confirm with the few who don't. And then you can decide, okay, this is probably a no-show. And you can decide whether you just let it be a no-show and know about it ahead of time, or whether you call the person, or whether you say, hey, I noticed you haven't confirmed, I'm going to reschedule this, and you push it back and you put them into some other sort of the part of the funnel or the process. It's all about just knowing ahead of time. So that point at which you ask for confirmation, that should be in enough time that if the person doesn't confirm or they cancel at that point, that you can fill that with someone else. So if you ask that a day before, but you really need 3 days to be able to get someone else in that spot, that's not early enough. Spread your reminders out so they're not annoying, but just helpful, so that when someone, if you need 3 days, make sure there's a 3-day reminder, and that will trigger that person. The engagement to say, please do something, will likely, for most people, trigger them to check their schedule. If they see something, they can just respond back, say, oh, I can't make it. And it's like having this crystal ball that you can look into and see the future about who most likely will no show, so you can address it at that stage.
One question I have for you that just popped up into my mind is, do you think that people sometimes rather not know versus being really honest to themselves about the percentage of people that are, changing their mind? Is it because we are chasing every dollar? What is it about the psychology? Because the truth of the matter is, right? If I think about this from a relationship perspective, Jonathan, I know not all men in this world are my partner, because I really only want one. If I have that mindset, then I should go in and it's like, okay, is this the one? Does this have potential to be one? And then I weed them out until I get to the one. But when we get into business, sometimes we talk ourselves into this could be a really good client. What's going on that side? Because I bet you looked into that.
So I think it's a lot about just not realizing how no shows impact it, and you need to decide to do something or not do it. If you don't make the decision, you're making the decision, you're not doing it. And so it's similar with this. It's like, if you're not reminding people up until the point where the appointment comes, that in your mind, that person's showing up. Even if it's very unlikely that person's going to show up, in your mind, there's still a possibility because the appointment hasn't happened. So people delude themselves into thinking, well, if I don't bother them, they'll show up. And it's really about experimenting, because there are certain businesses where people have convinced me that reminders don't work. So for example, I talked to someone who sells insurance, They go actually physically to the business and meet with people. They make the appointment ahead of time. They don't want to remind people because they are pretty sure the person is going to cancel ahead of time, and a lot of people, and they're also pretty sure the person's going to be there at the business. So if they go into a shop and the owner of the business is there, like they just want to show up and they don't want to give that. And I get that. But that is a certain circumstance where like the person is they can't avoid you. And then the person might send you away, say they're too busy, but it's a much higher barrier for that person to decline that meeting, especially since they've already scheduled it. But if someone's coming to you, or if someone has to go get on a Zoom, that doesn't exist. You can't force people to see you on Zoom before they click the link. And so so for most businesses, that meeting will more meetings will happen. It's a numbers game, just like everything in sales. It's like most likely if you implement a reminder process that reminds people enough ahead of time and says reasonable things and is helpful to the people, it will get, in the end, if you look back at your data for a month with reminders, a month without, it will be a dramatic difference for how many people show up and how many people don't show up. But on an individual level, you get very focused on, I don't want to bother them. I don't want to give them an out. And the answer is like, they always have an out. Even if they got on that call, they can always say no to the next step. Don't kid yourself. And so it's like, if they're not going to be a good, if all it takes is you reminding them about the value and saying reply C to confirm, and they respond that they want to cancel, it's okay. Like that is very likely not going to be a good client for you.
Excellent. Beata here with Jonathan talking about sales and how to actually get people to show up so you can make sales to grow your authority and scale your impact. And we will be right back after this message. Are you looking for the hidden opportunities for you in this market? Or are you simply wanting to figure out what is your unique differentiation factor that makes clients want to work with you and not your competitors? If this resonates, I want to invite you to go to uncoverysession.com and schedule your 15-minute complimentary uncovery session with one of our business growth advisors that will take you through what your number one business growth blocker is, what you can do to remove it, and what your very best next step should be. And now let's get back to the show. Jonathan, you just said something really interesting before the break, where we talked about the attachment to the belief that it's an airtight, ironclad appointment that I've set. And you said the reality of it is everybody has an out. And if people don't want to show up to the appointment, or they're dragging their feet, they're probably not a good fit. Assumingly, this is for ghosting, suddenly not responding. This falls sort of in the same category. Is there a way, in your experience with, kind of like getting people to show up, is there a way to bring people back, or is it not even worth it in your opinion?
Yes, it just depends on how to get them back. If it's to get them to essentially, I mean, I think tactics like the 9-word email and things like that, where you basically just send a note, and this can be in text also, that just says, are you still interested in XYZ? Are you still interested in solving that problem and growing your business? Are you still interested in cutting out that wasted time you've been spending on like anything like that? It's just a yes or no question, and it's really easy. And if someone we use that for marketing and sales aspects, and it works well because it after a period of non-response, it gets people to respond. Another tactic could be presenting why you think they're not responding. So it sounds, or like, I haven't heard from you. I'm assuming that life is really busy now. Plus, you mentioned XYZ happening in your life. And I'm guessing it's either one of those reasons, or maybe this is not actually a big problem. And that gives people a chance to basically prove you wrong and say, no, actually, if one of those is right, then great, they're not a good fit. If one of those but if none of them are right, it gives them an opportunity to correct, set the record straight and contact you back to say, it's actually because of XYZ. It's none of those reasons. And it starts the communication going again.
I have had that where I had a particular sequence in my emails when somebody wasn't responding with a very particularly headline that's my number one response rate. And people would come back and they would say, the reason I have not responded is because my wife of 40 years died. It's
Totally.
I'm actually in the ICU with a heart attack. And then you feel like a little bit like an idiot because you were presuming that they're so
Right.
busy and they're they're fighting for their life, or they had a massive tragedy in their life. I think that from the questioning is also really important. And I like that you
Yeah.
just gave me permission to not feel like an idiot when that happens, but that's actually a strategy, so that when they come back and say, it's not that I'm not interested, it's that I'm in the ICU after a heart attack, that then I don't have to feel bad for having made an assumption, but that I actually use the
Exactly.
strategy, because we talk about strategy all the time, to get them to tell me the truth. And now I
Right.
can react to that in real time.
Exactly. And if it's something that like someone just randomly drops off and it seems like either an emergency happened or they just completely ghosted you in the midst of an active conversation, I find something like that helpful, or something just saying, hey, I just wanted to make sure you're okay. And like, you might be thinking they're probably okay, they're probably ignoring me, but on the off chance there's an emergency, and it could be, and often there is. And so you always want to assume that you always want to just assume the best. Assume people are not just blowing you off, because often, there are just random emergencies. And even if they are blowing you off, you're not going to get anywhere by being rude.
And tell us about sort of the mindset of me not taking this personal, because I bet a lot of people on the call now go like, well, that sounds all great, Jonathan. But the reality of it is, I need the appointment, I need the money, I need to make the conversion, I need to pay my bills. And now you're telling me I'm just going to be like all kind of cool Joe about this, and nothing matters and whatever.
Yeah, no, it's not about nothing matters. I mean, for one thing, I've heard people talk in service businesses about how, well, I have their deposit, and if they don't show up and they're not worth my time. And I could see that definitely being for a coaching business, saying, whatever, they're not dedicated, they don't deserve my coaching. And it's like, are you building a friend group or are you building a business? If you're building a friend group, sure, maybe they're not worth your time as your friend, but the reality is you're building a business. You can't take everything personally. It really just comes back to sales. Like, I hate sales because I take everything personally and I can't handle the rejection. But that is just a reality of sales, and selling is a numbers game. And as a salesperson, there's no way you can become a salesperson or sell your own services without getting rejected a lot. It's really not about, I'm not saying that you should get rejected more. I'm just saying you shouldn't kid yourself with not reminding people, because you're just delaying the rejection often. It just fits into the numbers game. It's if you effectively do a sales call versus you do a bad sales call, well, that's going to affect your conversion rate. You can't kid yourself that you can just say anything. You have to effectively communicate. This is just part of that communication, to front load it, to make sure, because either way, you're going to be dealing with that rejection. And again, you just have to measure it, because maybe on the off chance, it's not a good fit for everyone, but the vast majority of people, it can dramatically increase your conversion rate by making sure that you're scheduled with people who are worth your time and are a good fit. Yeah. Rather than finding out on that call when they just don't show up.
Yeah. And I think you said something I also want to point out to all of our listeners. It is really a particular kind of attitude. You do have to have a thick skin, and you cannot take it personal. I cannot even begin to tell you how many times I've had people and they love the idea and they know I can help them, but then they don't want to do the work, because it is work. There's no way around it. I can't be more invested in your transformation than you are yourself. I had somebody who came and said, well, it was part of his inheritance that he had a part of the business, and somebody was trying to boot him out of the business. And I said, you need a business plan to walk in. He says, why should I come up with a business plan? I'm entitled to this. And I'm like, well, no wonder you are where you are, because you obviously don't understand the importance that it is a business. If I could get rid of these people ahead of time and weed them out, now these 3-4 hours that I have spent on multiple phone calls to help them to identify what the issue is, and then not making the decision to change it, what could I have done with this time? And I think that's how we really need to look at this, from the perspective is, yes, We do want to be proactive to bringing in clients, and we want to be proactive in saying, let's see if the avatar fits, what the different type of clientele is. But at the end of the day, what I'm hearing you say loud and clear, have a process and don't be afraid to have the process eliminate people.
Yeah, exactly. Because listen, if you have 100% close rate to that call that you're trying to get people to show up for, it's just a question of can you get more people to show up for that call? And if so, will you close more of them? And so the reminders will likely help you get more. And if you don't have 100% close rate, the question is, can I fill those spots with more relevant people and not the people who are just really not going to convert on that call? This is not about weeding out people who will pay you. This is about weeding out the people who won't pay you. That's what this will do. So the fear comes in when it's thinking, well, if I do this, I might cut down on the good people who will actually become my clients because maybe they'll get cold feet beforehand. But maybe you use a framework to do the call that you're like, here's what I'm going to cover. The 1, 2, 3, and then you talk about 1, you talk about 2, you talk about 3, and then you say, okay, here's what we covered, 1, 2, 3. You can't skip that intro. So this is just like a pre-intro. It's like the people who are engaged will hopefully be more engaged when they get on the call because they'll be like, all right, cool. Like I already got the reminder. I know what I'm doing on this call. I'm excited about it. And so that's really who you're trying to, amp up. And the people who you lose, you're trying to weed them out earlier. The losses just earlier in the process so you don't waste time.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Jonathan, for somebody who has now listened to this and says, well, maybe I need to look into how to get people to show up, where can we send them? What do you have for them?
Yeah, sure. So you can check out our website, goreminders.com. And in the show notes, I will send you a link to our free guide on how to craft reminder messages. It's basically just a bunch of tips of how to increase your show up rate. You don't even need our system for these tips. A lot of them, if you use a different system, you can implement that. If you do manually, you do this. It goes through, how to craft your reminder messages, the timing of it, things like that. So I'll get a link to that guide to you so you can put it in the show notes.
I would love that. Thank you so much, Jonathan. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And that's it for today. Thank you all for listening and watching. This is Beate Gillette, the Growth Architect, and goodbye. Thank you for listening to or watching the show. We are so excited that you're here and we are very grateful for you. Now it's our turn to ask you for help. Please do share this episode with one other person that needs to hear what we were talking about today. If there's any question you have about business, please do reach out to us and let us know. And don't forget to schedule your complimentary uncovery session at uncoverysession.com, where one of our business growth advisors will help you to figure out what your number one business growth blocker is in only 15 minutes. And that's it for us today. Until next time.